Here's another measure of legislative controversy. This on the Senate side. Senate Bill 86 says here, and this is a note I got from the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association, if enacted, would unconstitutionally abolish Georgia citizens' inviolate right to trial by jury, seeks to strip Georgia patients of their constitutionally guaranteed ability to hold negligent health care providers accountable before a jury of fellow citizens, would instead circumvent centuries of legal precedent by forcing injured patients' cases into a bureaucratic system of health care providers who would sit in sole judgment over the conduct of their colleagues. This horrible piece of legislation, or at least that's the characterization from the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association. Their president is Linley Jones. She joins us now. Thanks for your time this morning.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
All right, tell me first off about the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association. How many trial lawyers in Georgia?
We have over 2,000 members.
All right. Now, there are those, before we talk about what this bill does, there are those who will say, wait a minute, you have a vested interest in trial by jury. This is the Lawyers Enrichment Act. We want you guys to keep trotting these cases before juries. The meter keeps running for trial lawyers. Folks might look at your opposition to Senate Bill 86 and see nothing more than that.
Well, it's not just trial lawyers that have a right to trial by jury. It's just trial lawyers that work within the system, along with many, many others. It's Georgia citizens who have a right to trial by jury, and this is not new news. This goes as far back as our Declaration of Independence. It's a crucial tenet of our entire governmental system, and the notion that it can be replaced because folks are unhappy with this aspect or that aspect of the medical malpractice system is outrageous. But that is what's going on in this SB 86, and it is a threat to the constitutional rights of every Georgian.
All right, what would it do? What would Senate Bill 86 do?
Instead of an injured patient who was injured through the negligence of a medical provider having a right to trial by jury, they would go and have their claim determined by what this system sets up as an independent medical review panel that is in fact not independent at all. Whether or not they had in effect, a medical malpractice claim would be determined by a board of specialists from that medical specialty. So it just entirely strips away the notion of a jury of peers. And it replaces it with a bureaucratic system. And the bureaucratic system it replaces it with is huge. It's a mammoth bureaucratic system that doesn't exist now, that this bill proposes to put into existence. The list of directors and officers required to run this huge proposed system is outrageous. If you don't like bureaucracy, you can't like this bill, and if you care about your constitutional rights, you certainly can't support it either.
All right, now this, and again, we're talking with Linley Jones, Georgia Trial Lawyers Association. All of this is born of a need, or at the very least a perceived need, and you alluded to it a moment ago, that this notion that we're simply out of control with medical malpractice claims, got to rein this in somehow. Here is one mechanism by which to do it.
Well, that's not quite what it says in the legislation. What it says in the legislation and identifies as the issue is that not enough patients are able to obtain legal representation in order to obtain compensation. So, I'm looking at the bill right now. That's what it says, is that not enough people are able to get fair compensation for having had a medical injury. So kind of the opposite of what you're saying, not that there's so much litigation that we need to do something about it, but that these cases are so huge and so expensive, which is true, that not enough people are able to get compensation when they're victims of medical injuries.
I'm looking, by the way, at the list of Senate sponsors here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. John Albers, Brandon Beach, Steve Gooch. We just talked with him last week. Hunter Hill, Tommy Williams. All of them are Republicans. Republicans, as you no doubt know, in control of both the House and Senate in Atlanta. Things like this proposed from time to time. What do you gauge as the legislative appetite for this?
Well, let me tell you something. Republicans don't always act like Republicans. Republicans protect their constitutional rights. Republicans don't want to build bureaucracies. But I think that sometimes all of us can be confused by the issues and problems we see, but to throw out the right to trial by jury is to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And so I think that this is just perhaps well-intentioned, but certainly misdirected. You don't do away with the right to trial by jury. And what conceit would it be to think that you have come up with a better system than our founding fathers and than we've had in place throughout the history of our state? The Georgia State Constitution says the right to trial by jury shall be inviolate. That's the strongest language you'll find in the Constitution.
Among those also opposed to this, and I made kind of the backhanded allegation at the start of the discussion here that it's all about lawyers protecting lawyers here. The Medical Association of Georgia, as you point out, also opposes this bill. And this is a little surprising, or at least initially surprising, the Independent Insurance Agents of Georgia also lining up in opposition to this bill.
And you have to ask yourself who wants it. And I'll leave that for you and your other guests to answer. But the doctors don't want it. The lawyers don't want it. The citizens of Georgia who care about their constitutional rights don't want it. And the people who don't favor large bureaucracy making decisions in lieu of a jury don't want it. It's a terrible idea, and it's shocking that it has come up now for this third year in a row. This is the third year in a row that folks are trying to replace our jury trial system with something they think they've come up with that's a better idea.
Is it a myth, or is there some grounding in reality to this notion that part of the problem we have is that these jury awards are just out of control? These medical malpractice cases, the lawyers are out of control, the juries are out of control, the awards are out of control. Is there any basis in reality? I know that's the common perception out there. There's certain people who like to spin it that way. Is that the reality?
Not only is it not the reality, it's not even what the bill itself says is the basis for the bill. But more importantly, it's not the reality. It is a misperception that I think in recent years has been largely cleared up. I think 10 and 15 years ago, people were worried about runaway verdicts, and that a lot of that was debunked. And, now you have jurors in cases interviewed on the news about the decisions they made, and you get to say, oh, well, they knew things we didn't. They heard things we didn't. They felt that action needed to be taken, and they felt that compensation was fair based on what they heard. And you don't hear a lot of complaining about jury trial verdicts. Nothing in this bill states that it is a result of problems with jury verdicts. In fact, it states quite the opposite. It states that it seeks to allow more patients to have their claims heard because the expense and the investment of both the financial investment and the investment of a litigant's time and a lawyer's time in bringing a medical malpractice claim is so tremendous that it is difficult to bring such a claim, very, very difficult, and that is why the legislation in its preamble there speaks for itself. No, there aren't huge numbers of runaway verdicts going on, driving up insurance rates, yada, yada. And by the way, this bill proposes that this bureaucratic system would be paid for on the backs of the doctors, who would pay an annual fee for having this system that ranges up to $25,000 a year per doctor to fund this system that has all these bureaucrats running it so that people have their right to jury trial taken away and have these independent medical review panels. And there's no evidence, no objective evidence at all, that would impact the economics of the overall system. It would just move the impact from insurance companies that with whom doctors are able to negotiate and rather shop their rates and so forth, to a flat fee annually imposed by a bureaucracy that they have to pay for to fund a system that decides claims against them.
All right, finally, quickly, let's go on this. You mentioned it's the third year in a row for this or something like it. I'm sure you're up there as best you can counting votes. What do you see here? What's the likelihood? How worried are you about it this year?
We think that in past years, our legislators have educated themselves, citizens have educated themselves, that it has very little grassroots support, and that people are starting to understand that this is bubbling up every year, and for whatever reason, no doesn't mean no. So now a third year in a row, we're going to have to say no. I am confident that our legislature will say no. I'm confident that the citizens of the state of Georgia will say, we value our Seventh Amendment right to jury trial as much as we value our Second Amendment right to bear arms. And we're not going to stand for it. You can't take these things away from us.
Linley Jones, Georgia Trial Lawyers Association. Again, for those of you keeping score at home, it is Senate Bill 86. We'll watch. Thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you, Tim.
Quick break. When we come back, House